Mansfield came in our family in 1756. It had been in our family from 1756 until my grandfather and his siblings sold it in 1912. And they had tried to grow rice here after the Civil War, and it just had a devil of a time because they had several large hurricanes hit. They just didn't have the manpower to repair the dikes and that kind of type stuff. And so they sold it to a man from Auburn, New York by the name of Tuttle. And Mr. Tuttle kept it until 1930, I think it was 39, somewhere in that area. And he sold it to the Montgomerys from Androssan, Pennsylvania. And he did a magnificent job. All these buildings here that we look at that are brick today had been cypress. Like that's the old schoolhouse right there going down that sidewalk. And that had been a cypress building, and he bricked it in. And this old kitchen behind us over here, and that had been cypress, and they bricked that in as well. So he did a lot to improve Mansfield, but yet he maintained what was here. And then we bought it back in 2004 from the Smith family from Columbia. They had bought it from him in 1970 when he passed away. He bought it from his family. The first thing we did when we got here I guess it was in May of 2004, is really when we first started doing things. You know, we were here a few weeks before we did anything. The first thing we did was we realized the slave chapel was getting ready to collapse. So we had Tommy Graham from McClellanville come up and rebuild the chapel for us. That was the first thing we did. And then we gradually have rebuilt all the slave cabins but one. And that's a big, important part of Mansfield to us, preserving that history.
Yeah, so while everybody else is tearing down history, we are preserving it. It's important to preserve history. You can't erase history. And we treasure the history of South Carolina, and you can learn from history. And that's what we want to do. We want to learn from history. And wonderfully, we've had a couple of people contact us who are descendants of slaves here, who ultimately became board members of the foundation to restore the slave village, and they were so so, what is the word? They were so much a part of Mansfield. It's because they too wanted to be a part of their history. And one of them has died since, and he wanted to be buried here. And so he was. We had his funeral, or his memorial service here.
There was this lady that lived here. Her name was Rebecca Golden. Becky was my nanny, and had been a nanny. When we sold Mansfield, she went with my grandparents and aunt to Lake City, where she stayed until she died in 1968 or 69. And so she was like a part of my life growing up. And she used to tell me stories about Mansfield and living here as a child. She was about 10 years old when they moved, so she had spent the first 10 years of her life right here in Mansfield. And she would tell me stories about my grandfather and great-grandfather. And my great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier who fought at Sessionville down in Charleston. He had 2 horses shot out for him in one day and lived to fight again. But he used to tell her all the time, don't look back. And I think that was his way of telling her that, you know, life, as you grow up and mature, things happen to you and happen to people around you that you don't ever look back at and dwell on those things. Look to the future And I always thought it was such unique wisdom coming from this little black lady that I loved. It's like a second mother. And, you know, she loved us all. And she died in 1969. And the last time I saw Becky, I went to her home about 2 weeks before she died. And she was in a lounge chair, all covered up in a big heavy blanket. I remember that very well. And on the wall behind her, there were 4 pictures hanging on the wall. Well, hey, Mac. Hey, boy. How you doing? There were 4 pictures hanging on the wall. There was a picture of Martin Luther King, a picture of John F. Kennedy, a picture of my brother who was killed in Vietnam about 6 months later, and a picture of me. And, you know, I just never have gotten over the fact that she would put us in a group like that. You know, very important to her. Those are the only 4 pictures she had in her house that I remember. But, you know, that's who she was. She was just as wonderful as she could possibly be. And boy, could she ever make good fried chicken. I'm gonna add that in because it was unreal.